The precision of an airplane's takeoff is fascinating to watch until something goes terribly wrong. These takeoff failures, caught on camera, capture terrifying moments when control is lost, engines fail, or small mistakes turn into disasters. From fiery crashes to miraculous escapes, these incidents show how quickly things can go wrong in just a few seconds. What caused these tragic failures, and how do pilots react in these life-or-death situations? Let's take a closer look at some of the most shocking takeoff disasters. On November 12, 2001, American Airlines Flight 587 took off from John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. The Airbus A300 was headed to Las Americas Airport in the Dominican Republic, carrying 251 passengers and 9 crew members. Everything seemed normal at first, but soon after takeoff, the plane encountered turbulence caused by a Japan Airlines Boeing 747 that had taken off just minutes earlier. In an attempt to correct the aircraft's movements, the co-pilot, Sten Mullen, made aggressive rudder adjustments. Unfortunately, this put too much pressure on the vertical stabilizer, the part that helped steer the plane, and it broke off completely. Without it, the aircraft spun out of control. The forces were so intense that both engines detached from the wings. Tragically, the plane crashed into a neighborhood in Queens, New York, killing all 260 people on board and 5 people on the ground. Because the crash happened so close to the site of the 9/11 attacks, many feared it was another terrorist attack. However, the National Transportation Safety Board later determined that the crash was caused by the pilot's excessive rudder inputs rather than terrorism. Another devastating plane crash occurred in Japan on August 12, 1985. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747, was flying from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka International Airport. The aircraft had 509 passengers and 15 crew members on board. Shortly after takeoff, the plane suffered a catastrophic failure when the rear pressure bulkhead, a critical part of the aircraft, broke apart. This failure was caused by poor repairs done 7 years earlier after the plane's tail had been damaged. The sudden decompression caused the vertical stabilizer to break off, making it nearly impossible to control the plane. Captain Masaomi Takahama and First Officer Yutaka Sasaki struggled to keep the aircraft stable, but it was a losing battle. The plane eventually crashed into Mount Takamagahara in Gunma Prefecture, bursting into flames. A total of 520 people lost their lives, making it the deadliest single-plane crash in history. Miraculously, 4 passengers survived, though they were seriously injured. Another tragic accident occurred on February 16, 2000, involving Emery Worldwide Airlines Flight 17, a McDonnell Douglas DC-8 cargo plane. Shortly after taking off from Sacramento, California, the crew, including Captain Warren Richardson and flight engineer Russell Hicks, noticed issues with controlling the aircraft's pitch, the movement that tilts the plane up and down. Despite their efforts to turn back for an emergency landing, the aircraft crashed into a car salvage yard, killing all 3 crew members on board. Investigators discovered that a critical part of the plane, the right elevator control tab, had come loose due to improper maintenance. The bolt securing the part had not been properly inspected, making it impossible for the crew to keep the plane steady. On October 31, 1996, TAM Airlines Flight 402, a Fokker 100 aircraft, crashed shortly after takeoff from Congonhas Airport in São Paulo, Brazil. The flight was supposed to travel to Santos Dumont Airport in Rio de Janeiro. As the plane took off, a system called the thrust reverser, which is normally used to slow the aircraft during landing, activated unexpectedly on the right engine. This created an imbalance that made it difficult for the pilots to control the plane. Despite their efforts, the aircraft lost altitude and crashed into a neighborhood near the airport. All 95 people on board and 4 people on the ground lost their lives. Investigators found that a faulty micro switch and poor maintenance were responsible for the tragic accident. On August 20, 2008, Spanair Flight 5022, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, crashed while attempting to take off from Madrid Barajas Airport in Spain. The aircraft, carrying 166 passengers and 6 crew members, was bound for Gran Canaria Airport. As the plane sped down the runway, it failed to gain enough lift and crashed shortly after takeoff. Investigators later found that the flaps and slats, which help generate lift, had not been set correctly. The pilots, Captain Antonio Garcia Luna and First Officer Francisco Javier Mulet, were unaware of this because the warning system that should have alerted them was not functioning. The aircraft skidded off the runway, hit the ground hard, and burst into flames. Out of the 172 people on board, 154 perished, while only 18 survived with severe injuries. The investigation concluded that the crash was primarily caused by the failure to set the flaps and slats, combined with the malfunctioning warning system. On April 29, 2013, National Airlines Flight 102, a Boeing 747 cargo plane, took off from Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. The aircraft was carrying 5 large military vehicles as cargo. Shortly after takeoff, the unsecured cargo shifted, throwing off the plane's center of gravity. This caused the aircraft to pitch up sharply, lose control, and stall. A nearby dashboard camera captured the terrifying moment as the plane climbed steeply, stalled, and crashed near the runway. Tragically, all 7 crew members on board lost their lives. Investigators concluded that the primary cause of the crash was the failure to properly secure the heavy cargo, highlighting the importance of proper loading procedures in aviation safety. One of the most shocking mid-air explosions happened to TWA Flight 800 on July 17, 1996. The Boeing 747 was flying from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York to Paris, France, with 212 passengers and 18 crew members. Shortly after takeoff, a massive explosion in the center wing fuel tank tore the plane apart in midair. Debris rained down into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Long Island. Tragically, all 230 people on board lost their lives. After a lengthy investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board determined that a short circuit had ignited a flammable fuel-air mixture in the tank, though they could not pinpoint the exact source of the electrical fault. On March 10, 1989, Air Ontario Flight 1363, a Fokker F-28 Fellowship, crashed while taking off from Dryden Regional Airport in Ontario, Canada. The plane had been delayed on the ground, and during that time, ice and snow built up on the wings. Despite the dangerous conditions, the pilots decided to take off without de-icing the aircraft. As the plane attempted to lift off, the ice disrupted airflow over the wings, preventing the aircraft from gaining enough lift. The plane crashed into trees at the end of the runway, bursting into flames. Sadly, 24 passengers and 2 crew members lost their lives, while 43 others survived with injuries. Investigators found that the decision to take off without de-icing was the main cause of the crash, highlighting the critical importance of proper winter flight procedures. These tragic accidents serve as painful reminders of the dangers involved in aviation. While air travel is generally safe, human errors, technical failures, and maintenance issues can lead to catastrophic results. However, each investigation helps improve aviation safety, ensuring that lessons are learned to prevent similar tragedies in the future. During its flight, the aircraft encountered a severe thunderstorm and flew straight into a microburst, an intense, sudden downward wind that caused a rapid loss of altitude. The pilots, Captain Edward Connors, First Officer Rudolph Price, and Flight Engineer Nick Narsick, fought desperately to regain control. Despite their efforts, the plane crashed just a mile short of the runway, bounced, and collided with a water tank. The impact shattered the aircraft, causing it to break apart and burst into flames. Tragically, 137 people lost their lives, including 1 person on the ground. However, 27 passengers and crew members survived, many with severe injuries. Though some made it out alive, their lives were forever changed by the horrifying ordeal. United Airlines Flight 232 was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 that suffered a catastrophic failure on July 19, 1989. The aircraft, registered as N11819U, was operating a domestic passenger flight from Denver, Colorado, to Philadelphia, with a planned stop at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. On board were 285 passengers and 11 crew members. Mid-flight, one of the plane's tail-mounted engines failed, leading to a complete loss of hydraulic fluid. This meant the pilots could no longer use the normal flight controls. The crew, led by Captain Alfred C. Haynes, First Officer William R. Records, and Flight Engineer Dudley J. Dvorak, worked together to handle the emergency. With hydraulics gone, they ingeniously used the remaining engine's thrust to maneuver the aircraft. They attempted an emergency landing at Sioux Gateway Airport in Sioux City, Iowa. As they neared the runway, it became evident that a safe landing was nearly impossible. Upon touchdown, the plane cartwheeled and broke apart in a violent crash. Sadly, 111 people lost their lives, but remarkably, 185 passengers and crew survived, though many suffered serious injuries. The survival of so many in such a devastating accident was considered nothing short of a miracle. In January 2008, British Airways Flight 38 experienced a terrifying crash landing. The Boeing 777, registered as GYMMM, was flying from Beijing, China, to London Heathrow Airport with 136 passengers and 16 crew members. Everything was going smoothly until the aircraft neared its destination. Without warning, both engines lost power. The pilots, Captain Peter Burkill and First Officer John Coward, attempted to increase thrust, but nothing happened. The plane rapidly lost altitude and, before anyone could react, crash-landed on the grass just short of the runway. The aircraft skidded to a halt with its nose gear crushed under the impact. Miraculously, no one was killed. While 47 passengers were injured, only one suffered serious harm. Thanks to the quick actions of the crew and rescue teams, everyone was safely evacuated. Investigations later revealed that ice crystals had formed in the fuel system during the flight, restricting fuel flow to the engines at the worst possible moment. On July 6, 2013, Asiana Airlines Flight 214 was approaching San Francisco International Airport when disaster struck. The Boeing 777, registered as HL7742, carried 291 passengers and 16 crew members. As the plane approached the runway, it became clear that it was too low and slow. The pilot in command, Captain Lee Kang-kuk, was still in training on this aircraft type, while his instructor, Captain Lee Jong-minit, was supervising. The aircraft's tail struck a seawall just before the runway, causing it to twist, break apart, and catch fire. Chaos erupted as passengers scrambled to escape. Tragically, 3 people died, and 187 others were injured, some critically. Investigations by the National Transportation Safety Board revealed that the pilots failed to maintain the correct speed and glide path, relying too much on automated systems rather than manual control. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight for 590, a Concorde jet, suffered a fatal accident during takeoff from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. The supersonic jet, registered as FBTSC, was en route to New York City on a charter flight. On board were 100 passengers and 9 crew members. As the plane accelerated down the runway, it ran over a piece of metal debris that had fallen from a previously departed Continental Airlines DC-10. This debris punctured one of the Concorde's tires, sending fragments into the fuel tank, which ignited a massive fire. Despite their best efforts, the pilots, Captain Christian Marty, First Officer Jean Marcotte, and Flight Engineer Gilles Jardinot, were unable to regain control. The aircraft crashed into a hotel in Gonesse, near the airport. All 109 people on board and 4 people on the ground lost their lives. The accident underscored the importance of strict runway inspections, as a single piece of debris led to an unimaginable tragedy. The Concorde was retired from commercial service in 2003. In April 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, a Boeing 737 registered as N772SW, suffered a catastrophic engine failure during a routine flight from New York to Dallas. On board were 144 passengers and 5 crew members. Mid-flight, the left engine broke apart, sending debris toward the fuselage. A piece struck a window, causing a rapid loss of cabin pressure. Panic ensued as passengers struggled to breathe. One passenger, Jennifer Roy-Arden, was partially sucked out of the window. Despite desperate efforts from fellow passengers and flight attendants, she did not survive. The pilots, Captain Tammy Jo Schultz and First Officer Darren Elliser, remained calm under pressure, successfully landing the aircraft at Philadelphia International Airport. Investigators later determined that the engine failure was due to metal fatigue in one of the fan blades, emphasizing the need for rigorous engine inspections. In November 2021, a Royal Navy fighter jet pilot aboard the HMS Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier faced a life-or-death moment. While attempting takeoff, the jet failed to gain enough speed and began falling off the deck. The pilot ejected just in time, safely parachuting into the sea while the jet plunged into the ocean. This incident highlighted the critical importance of ejection seats as a last-resort safety measure for pilots. Bird strikes pose a constant threat to aircraft, with the Federal Aviation Administration reporting over 10,000 birdplane collisions annually. On December 31, 2011, Southwest Airlines Flight 372 took off from Portland International Airport, bound for Oakland, California. Shortly after takeoff, 2 birds flew near the plane. One was sucked into the right engine, causing minor damage to the wing. Fortunately, the pilots managed to return safely to Portland without any injuries to passengers. On December 20, 2016, Aerosuca Flight 157, a Boeing 727 cargo plane, took off from German Olano Airport in Puerto Carreño, Colombia. The aircraft was carrying 20,000 pounds of goods and 6 crew members. Almost immediately, trouble arose. The plane ran out of runway, broke through a fence, and barely cleared a crowd of spectators before struggling to gain altitude. Moments later, the aircraft lost an engine, its hydraulic systems, and part of its landing gear. The pilots fought to control the aircraft for 2 minutes before it struck a tree and crashed. Investigators found multiple issues, including an airport too small for such a large plane, pilot errors, and a company policy that reduced takeoff speeds to save fuel, an oversight that proved fatal. Perhaps the most famous aviation emergency occurred on January 15, 2009, when U.S. Airways Flight 1549 made an emergency landing in the Hudson River. The Airbus A320, carrying 150 passengers and 5 crew members, was en route from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte, North Carolina. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft struck a flock of Canadian geese, disabling both engines. Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a veteran pilot with nearly 20,000 flight hours, quickly realized they couldn't return to an airport. Instead, he skillfully glided the aircraft onto the Hudson River, just missing the George Washington Bridge. Remarkably, the plane remained intact, allowing ferries and rescue teams to save everyone on board. Captain Sully and his crew received widespread recognition, including the Master's Medal for Outstanding Achievement in Aviation. His heroic actions were later immortalized in the 2016 film Sully, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Tom Hanks. These aviation incidents serve as stark reminders of both the dangers of flight and the incredible skill of pilots and rescue teams who fight to save lives in the face of disaster.